Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This is the fifth installment of Hannon Hill's 8-part webinar series this year, and the first of our summer series. Whether this is your first time with us or you are a returning attendee, welcome. This webinar is brought to you by Hannon Hill, makers of Cascade CMS. Our suite of products help you future-proof your websites through maximum security, robust web governance, scalability, web personalization, and action items that will increase efficiency on your site. All this while enjoying the best customer support in the industry. Hannon Hill has been dedicated to serving higher ed for the last 24 years. We proudly serve 340 institutions with a remarkable renewal rate of 96% year over year. Now, with all this, you may be wondering, why does a CMS provider host a webinar on podcasting? And that's a great question. But here at Hannon Hill, we understand that effective communication is vital to building a connection with your community. And that's why our webinars are on diverse topics throughout the year to benefit you, our clients. We also recognize that engaging your students, faculty, alumni, and staff is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And podcasting offers a dynamic way to share stories, insights, updates that resonate on a personal level, helping you grow your stakeholder loyalty with your institution. So now for the next 60 minutes or so, our speakers will walk you through best practices on how to start and scale your college and university podcasting engine. Our speakers today are Kate Young from This is Purdue and John Boccacino from Cuse Conversations of Syracuse University. My name is Chris Raposo, and I lead the marketing efforts here at Hannon Hill. This session will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you in the upcoming days. There will also be a short Q&A or maybe a long Q&A, we'll see. So please feel free to drop your questions in the comments below, and we will answer them accordingly at the end. With that, I'm going to stop the share of the poll, and now please, Kate Young, let's go into the introduction.
Hello, thank you for joining us today, everyone. I'm Kate Young. I'm the proud host, writer, and executive producer of This is Purdue, which is Purdue University's official podcast. I'm a Purdue alumna myself. I graduated from Purdue in 2012, kicked off my broadcast journalism career in news as a digital producer and reporter. So I do have that news background, and coming back into podcasting has been really cool to use those skills again. So I've also worked in public relations, social media, sports marketing, and then I transitioned into professional podcasting about 6 years ago. So during my time leading This is Purdue, the podcast has won several international awards, a W3 Gold Award for Best Education Series, and a Webby Awards honoree for Best Science and Education episode, to name a few. Our podcast is also frequently ranked on Apple Podcast top charts. And in March of this year, our team hit #1 on the education top chart. So we're really proud of that. We've been seeing a lot of #2s, and we're striving to get back to that #1 spot again. But I live in Carmel, Indiana with my husband, David. That's a suburb of Indianapolis. I'm a huge Swiftie. I've got my Purdue Taylor Swift friendship bracelets on, just like in that photo. That was a recent Purdue event in downtown Indy, but love staying active, lots of walks while listening to podcasts, Peloton. I play in a golf league, and then I also love reading and reality TV. So if anyone's watching Love Island, let me know.
Very good. John?
Yeah, first and foremost, I want to thank Chris for the honor and the privilege of coming on to talk about the podcast. My colleagues at Syracuse and our Division of Communications know firsthand how much I've been bitten by the podcasting bug, shall we say. It's something I've really been proud of, our work with Cuse Conversations. And I think what's cool about this panel we're going to bring together today is Kate and I have very differing interactions and experiences with podcasting, but we really have something we can give everybody on this audience from any budget, any size of your institution to get off the ground and get your podcast up and running. I, again, am the kind of jack of all trades of the Cuse Conversations podcast. I host the episodes for 90% of them. I write the content, I do the editing, and I produce and then release the episodes on our social media channels. It really is a team effort in the Division of Communications, but for me with the podcast, this has been my baby. I've been doing the podcast since July of 2019. I love long form storytelling. And much like Kate, I've got a pretty interesting background that leads itself nicely into the podcasting world. I was a former sports reporter with Gannett newspapers in Rochester, New York. And while I was there, I did a lot of multimedia on top of my print and web articles. I would go do video highlights of different high school sports games during the week or the weekends for our website. It was really multimedia journalism before that became such a prevalent thing in our space and our industry. And while I was doing that, I worked at a radio show as well on the high school sports teams I was covering. And that hour-long show really got me introduced and hooked on the platform of radio, which I then turned into the podcasting medium here at Syracuse University. The power of long-form, engaging storytelling that really reaches out, hooks your audience from the get-go, and wants them to come back more and more when it comes to our audiences and our episodes that we release. And so basically, Chris, that's a little bit about me, and I can't wait to talk about the podcasting and Cuse Conversations and what we do to engage and grow our audience.
Very good. All righty then.
So I gave a little bit of the background here with our podcast, but before I came to the Division of Communications, and I'm a two-time alum myself of Syracuse, I should have mentioned that previously, but I earned my broadcast journalism degree from our Newhouse School of Public Communications in 2003. In my humble opinion, the best year to be an alum. We won the men's basketball championship for the first time in school history. So I got my undergraduate in 2003, really cut my teeth in the journalistic chops, learning what is a story, what makes for engaging and compelling content. And back then, multimedia journalism and podcasting wasn't a thing. I mean, you would have NPR doing long form radio pieces, but there weren't podcasts. I mean, this whole medium was not even in its existence. So if you had told me back then that I'd be making a large part of my job out of podcasting, I'd probably look at you a little cockeyed. But it's a passion of mine telling these stories. And I joined the Syracuse University's Office of Alumni Engagement in 2016, doing alumni engagement efforts with our 250,000 living alumni around the world. And that was really how the podcast started. We were trying to come up with ways. We knew alumni wanted to know what's happening on campus. We know that they wanted to hear what the students were up to and the success stories of our successful alumni. But we also knew the data told us they were not reading the stories we were posting on our website. They might skim and you might get a paragraph that they would read, but there really wasn't a conversion rate where people would stick around and read the story from start to finish. So me having my radio background and my podcasting background, because I did do a podcast on the Buffalo Bills before I came over to Syracuse as well. So I had already launched a podcasting network for Buffalo Rumblings and the SB Nation property of sports websites. I said, look, I bleed orange. There's so many alumni out there that want to hear and keep their pulse on what's happening on campus, and they want to be connected to their fellow alums. A podcast is the perfect platform. And back then, the audiences were spiking. People were listening to podcasts because it was the new technology. It was really the new medium, and people were looking forward to ways to connect, and they were willing to put the time in to listen. If a story happened to focus anywhere from 20 minutes, our podcast typically goes 20 to 40 minutes is our sweet spot, because we found that anything less, you'll still get a good engagement rate, but people are left unsatisfied. They've heard a story, but there's more. They want to know more. You kind of left some meat on the bone there with those shorter episodes. And with episodes that are an hour or longer, we've done a couple of those, but they've mostly been multi-chapter episodes. And what I mean by that is we'll have multiple guests on talking about a complex topic and giving each guest, the proper attention and their proper due. So we'll do, say, 50 minutes on the launching of a new degree program, like our esports program here at Syracuse, and how that can benefit the student population. But are basically a long way of saying our podcast has become such an invaluable communications tool here in our toolkit at Syracuse, as a way for us to tell these impactful, meaningful, and long-form stories. And as you all know, whether you've started a podcast or you're thinking about launching one, this is content that can be consumed on demand at the audience's beck and call when they want to download and listen to an episode. And so we seized on this back in 2019, and it just took off like wildfire. And while we had a great success with those alumni stories, I wanted to branch my career out, and I moved up and took a promotion in our division of communications. And thankfully, my administration, my bosses were very supportive from day one of taking the podcast and expanding it from an alumni themed focus to broadening out to include the entire campus community. Because the more we dug, the alumni stories had a theme to them, and it was alumni has success on campus. Here's what they credit their career success to. And those are cool and those are fun. And it's a touch point to engage maybe some alumni who have been disconnected from the university and get them reintroduced to their alma mater. But it's so much more than that. The students we have that are blazing a trail with their efforts, with their academic research that they're putting in to really be the game changers that they want to be once they graduate. Our faculty who are doing world-class research efforts, we wanted to be telling the stories of the students, the faculty, the staff, and the alumni in the podcast. And it's been a recruiting tool too. We know that there are parents of potential students and future students who do listen to our podcast. We get feedback from them saying, this is great to get a little slice of life as to what it's like to be a part of the Orange community. Because as we say here at Syracuse, you're forever orange. We want to get that pipeline of affinity for your school in from day one. And the podcast has really been a very successful marketing tool. We do all the tracking measures you're going to hear Kate talk about when it comes to listens and downloads and retention and engagement rate. We promote our episodes with a very thought out social media plan. And we really want to do a lot of studying on how people are listening, where they're listening, what they're listening to, and then when we might be losing them. Because, and you'll hear on a later part of my slide, we have a really good retention and completion rate, but there are some episodes we could be doing better at. So we're trying to come up with ways to improve and refine the podcasting platform we're doing here at Syracuse. Chris, next slide, please. So I mentioned this is a valuable tool in our content ecosystem. And again, I want to give credit to our vice president, to our director, our associate director of communications. They have really allowed us to take this podcast and grow it from what it was in alumni engagement to what we want it to be here in the division of communications. And what's really cool about our podcasting platform, we touch on everything. We do athletics focus. I've got this sports background. So of course you saw my previous slide had Adrian Autry, our men's basketball coach. We like to focus on athletics, but we really want to touch on those moments of pride that are taking place on campus, whether it's a cultural celebration or a heritage month, whether there's a key strategic initiative, a point of pride. We recently rolled out a new academic strategic plan, and we broke down a very complex topic in an easy to understand format. And what was really nice about the podcast, besides the fact that it's long form and we had people can listen to it whenever it's convenient for them, we also release these stories that live on our website that will embed the podcast episode with a Q&A that breaks down the boilerplate of why you should listen to this week's episode of the Cuse Conversations podcast. And we found that that Q&A, along with the social media strategy, really helps drive our traffic to both the SU News website and get people to subscribe to Cuse Conversations. And the best part about all of this, 95% of our episodes are organic conversations where it's an alum talking with a faculty, a staff member, or a student. I don't want these episodes to feel like they're canned or they're rehearsed in their answers. It's very off the cuff. And I found that there's some instances that we obviously have sensitivities and we will vet the questions carefully with leadership. But for the most part, they're organic. And what I find happens with that is you get natural and authentic conversations and reactions to your questions. And that leads to more engaging content and podcast episodes. Next slide, Chris. So I mentioned that one of the biggest parts about the podcast, we want to own Cuse Conversations. We are the Syracuse University podcast. It's a big deal to be featured on one of our episodes, and we try to reward that by working with our campus partners when there is a high-level guest we want to have come on, again, tying into one of our thematic episodes we're going to roll out with our content calendar. We map out our episodes well in advance. We release them on average twice per month, every other Tuesday. So you develop a cadence. So there's an expectation for when people are checking out the podcasts. They know exactly when an episode's going to drop and when to check for it on their different platforms or on social media. We provide toolkits to our campus communicators to make it as easy as possible for them to amplify the message and spread the word. And I like to think, based on those strong campus partnerships that we've built up, they go out of their way to both give us good guest suggestions. This is a coveted spot being on the podcast, so there's competition. And for example, we had a commencement themed episode where we got 25 suggestions of people who were saying, you got to talk to this graduating senior or this graduate student who's about to get their degree. They would be perfect for the podcast. That partnership has led to those relationships where people make suggestions for who would be a really good guest. And I can't stress enough building up partnerships with your campus communicators. They will help be your best friends when it comes to driving these ideas and coming up with engaging guests. We also try to have a really vibrant presence on campus through our digital signage at the different campus buildings, the schools and colleges. We have a strong email presence for the podcast, and it gets promoted in our newsletter called SU Today, and also in the different school and college magazines. So cross promotion everywhere is a really key component of getting our podcast out there and really spreading the word. We want to tell stories that the campus community cares about, and I think we've done a really good job with our 165 and counting episodes here of the Cuse Conversations podcast. And an added bonus, our team is Division of Communications. We have partners that we work with on our own team in media relations, and when there's a faculty expert, for example, this graphic of Rick Wright, who grew up knowing the late Dr. Martin Luther King. He had Sunday school lessons with Dr. King's sister. They would do Sunday dinners in Dr. King's home growing up. And those valuable lessons, we pitched this out around our annual Martin Luther King Jr. celebrations, the largest MLK celebrations on a college campus across the country, as a way to cross-promote our podcast with current and timely events that students and our campus community were talking about. Next slide. And the results of this coordinated marketing plan and coordinated promotional plan, we have nearly a 62% completion rate with our episodes. And almost half of them, we get the audience making it through 3/4 of an episode or more. It's incredible the growth we've had. It's incredible the retention that we get. As much as people like to malign the lack of attention spans, and you've all heard the data, people will tune out to a piece of video if it doesn't catch their attention in 6 seconds or less, which is a scary fact, how small of a window you've got to really get their attention. Well, the podcast has proven time and time again that with long form content and it's engaging and people want to hear it, they're going to come back and listen to your episodes. And we've seen a great growth of 31% in our audience's listens from fiscal year 22 to fiscal year 2024. Our social posts promoting the podcast are some of the most engaging ones we have on our social media platforms. And we've been using video clips, even though we're an audio podcast. We'd like to go video down the road. We do use video recordings from our Zoom sessions to drive extra traffic and promote the episodes on social media, which therefore leads to increased listens and downloads. And Bob Costas, like Chris mentioned, off air with us, we were talking about some of the notable alumni we've had on. He was such a great guest, coming on for almost an hour to promote the baseball season, the changes to Major League Baseball. This was last March, and it was an awesome conversation. And that episode is in our top 3 for most downloaded of all time. Next slide. Now, I want to play 2 quick examples of engaging episodes because you might be wondering what makes for great podcast content or a great guest. Our first one I want to introduce, if you've seen the show Ted Lasso, Zava really stole the show in season 3 as the Me First world's greatest soccer player. Well, we had an alum named Maximilian Osinski who took on the role, but only after doing some soul searching at first. He at first was going to say no to the role because he goes, I've never played soccer. How can I possibly be the world's greatest soccer player on Ted Lasso? He's also got a really inspiring story about how his refugee parents, he was born in a refugee camp to immigrant parents, and having those humble upbringings really fueled his acting dreams. We're going to hear a little clip right now.
And I read the breakdown and it says world's greatest soccer player. Any ethnicity, can be from anywhere in the world, record this scene and then please record yourself demonstrating your soccer skills. It's just like, I give up. That's not me. I play 0 soccer. And I was I literally started talking myself out of taping for it, because I was like, I've seen the show and I've seen all these great actors like Christo and Collar and Phil Dunst and in these wide shots playing really good soccer. And I read about how they actually, some of them played in minor league soccer divisions and stuff in Europe. So I said, I've got no shot. And I just called a friend of mine, Damo in Australia. And, you know, because I was literally about to call my manager and say, I think we should just pass, man. Like, this is, they can get anyone. They can even stunt cast this role. In my mind, I was like, they can call a real soccer player to play the best soccer player in the world. And he was just like, no, just show them what you got, highlight your skills. You know, you're Polish, you're in physical shape like a soccer player. He was like, just go, don't worry about the soccer stuff, do the audition, and then go to the park, take your shirt off and work out like the guy, you know? And so he talked me into it. And with the help of my wife, we did this scene. I improvised a little bit in Polish. Then we went out to the park across the street from our apartment. And I remember it was like 50 degrees. And I just started working out in character, you know, having fun, like doing pull-ups on tree limbs and squatting tree logs and warming up like one. And then we recorded some slow motion soccer kicks and headbutts. And I don't think that fooled anyone over at the show that he was good. But I think that kind of bravado and confidence of the camera maybe, you know, is what caught their interest.
And what I love about the Zava piece of it, before we get to my buddy Anish Shroff here, what I love about the Zava piece with Max Osinski, very few people on campus knew he was an alum, but nobody knew what he had been up to. He had kind of fallen through the wayside when it came to university communications. And my wife and I are huge Ted Lasso fans. We had heard through the grapevine that he was involved with the show. We start watching the episodes, and we recorded that episode right after the season finale of season 3 of Ted Lasso. So we capitalized on the momentum and the buzz around the show to really bring an Orange success story and from that point, Max has become so involved. We have study abroad students over in London, and he will go out, reach out to them and teach them on the side. He'll do little guest appearances in classes to help them out with any sort of acting questions they might have. He's become so engaged with the Syracuse University. Our men's soccer team won the national tournament for the first time, and they're working on coming up with a way to do a Zava Syracuse jersey to give Max back on campus. What a cool way to reconnect with an awesome alum like Max. And now the next little clip I want to play, it's a little shorter than Max's, but Anish Shroff, I was a senior when Anish was a freshman here at Syracuse, and we both had broadcast journalism dreams. And he, of course, has risen up to be very successful in the sportscasting world. He was ESPN's voice of college lacrosse, and he recently got the play-by-play job of the Carolina Panthers, the only minority to hold a radio play-by-play voice, and one of only a handful of South Asian sportscasters in the industry. With Anish, we talked about the stereotypes he had to encounter and how he wants to set the stage for future South Asian sportscasters to follow in his footsteps and achieve their broadcasting dreams.
The one part of this story which I have told, and I have spoken to South Asians about it, and I said, the one part of this story that we need to take ownership is, you know, this is not a profession that is looked upon favorably in the South Asian community. You're not going to be a doctor. You're not going to be an engineer. You're not getting your MBA. You don't want to go to grad school. Like, what are you doing? And he wants to go and do what? Communications? Like, that's just not what we do. And so a lot of South Asians who may have wanted to pursue this path don't get the one thing that they need. And the one thing that I had, and I didn't know it was so unique until many years later when I started talking to others like me, and they would ask me the question, like, were your parents cool with this? And I was like, yeah, my parents encouraged me. Like, really? Yeah. I said, I never felt the pressure that I had to go be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or go get an MBA or do one of those things that, you know, are traditionally associated with the South Asian subculture. So from that standpoint, we got to take ownership and we got to encourage our kids to do what you want.
And again, those are two examples I'm very proud of. I could go on and on of all the different tangible takeaways from our episodes, but the last one I want to mention, there's not a clip for it, but Chris, if you want to go to the next slide, it'll play into where we are headed. We had one more episode with our basically Mary Grace Almondrez runs our Office of Diversity and Inclusion. As everyone on this call knows, higher education and the state of DEIA has been a very controversial topic with the Supreme Court ruling last summer. And I was so proud. Mary Grace is such a willing partner with us on the podcast. We had her on to break down the state of DEIA affairs here at Syracuse University and what it means for current students and future students. So it's not just our notable alumni that make great guests. It's staff members like Mary Grace Almondrez. It's Dylan France and Andy Rose Oates, who you see here. We had them on for this past Black History Month, talking about how they have been trained and learned how to become agents of change here at Syracuse, thanks to their classes and their engagement with clubs and activities. It's really an exciting time for us. We have a lot of things planned where we'd like to go with the podcast. It's not Now, unfortunately for me with the Cuse Conversations, I have other responsibilities, so I can't focus solely on the podcast. But the little what's next list is my pipe dream of where I would like to take the show in the next couple of years, including live episodes with audience participation and a Q&A where questions can be asked right on the scene, and we get that awesome engagement. Those are things that help build the community that we crave with Cuse Conversations, not only with an active social presence, but getting a chance to interact real time with both the host and the guests that we have coming on the episodes. We would love to at one point get a YouTube channel. We again are right now audio only. We do record through Zoom. So again, like I mentioned, we get video snippets we use to promote the episodes, but a YouTube channel is hopefully going to be coming for us sometime in the short future. We have an NPR station on campus that will air some of our episodes. I'm working with them to make it so that we get a consistent format where whether it's Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening, they will play the latest episode in its entirety to drive our traffic and have more of a relationship with, again, a key stakeholder on the Syracuse University campus. And the last thing I want to mention that's very underrated in my opinion, but the podcast, the students that come on love talking about themselves and their accomplishments, and it really engages with our campus community. But there's a hands-on opportunity as well with these podcasts to reach out. We have a College of Visual and Performing Arts that produces world-class musicians and composers, and we really want to make the podcast a hands-on experience as part of that experiential learning experiences here on campus, where maybe a student wants to design our intro music or the bump music or the theme music, if you will, that we use for the podcast. So that's basically Cuse Conversations in a nutshell. And again, we produce episodes twice per month throughout the whole school year and the summers, and we aim for every other Tuesday. I will have more to talk about with Cuse Conversations, but I need to turn over the part of the presentation to my great friend and colleague, Kate Young from This Is Purdue.
Thank you, John. That was fantastic. John and I met last year at a podcast conference, and we've stayed in touch. We've had some monthly chats, and he's been a great resource, and I hope vice versa from him and I. But that was incredible. Again, my name is Kate. I'm going to discuss the official university for for Purdue University. This is Purdue. Much like John said, this podcast is my baby. I have been doing this show for almost 3.5 years now, and it's been just the joy of a lifetime, being a Purdue alum. I went here. I know what it's like to be a Boilermaker, and sharing these stories has just been a highlight of my career thus far. So I'm going to highlight the growth and strategy and kind of the evolution of this show. So for those who might have a podcast and are looking to scale up, I hope you can walk away from this webinar with at least a few solid ideas. If you're starting a show too, I mean, there's going to be lots of ideas for you too. And I want you to know that you can start small. Some of our video production has been very much has seen a lot of growth. Part of that is because I have a wonderful video team, but the podcast covers a large variety of topics. So we have deans, athletic coaches, alumni who are CEOs of global companies, Tony-nominated actors, NASA astronauts, right? So it's a variety of topics. And one of our main goals is this brand awareness for Purdue. And that storytelling element is really important when it comes to Purdue and our brand. So another thing about podcasting, you can tell stories in a different way versus a blog post or written article, social media posts. You can hear that excitement. Maybe you can hear the sadness or the nostalgia in a guest's voice. And then, of course, we're all stuck to our phones. We're watching TV. We're on Netflix. But podcasts are the only medium where you don't have to stare at a screen. So our listeners can catch us, while they're walking their dog, while they're folding laundry, maybe they're mowing the lawn. And that's something that's really just powerful about this medium. So about our show, this started in January of 2020. We all know what happened next in 2020, but it was actually started by an intern, and our central marketing and communications department, which is where I'm housed in Purdue, was kind of testing it out. Like, should we go all in on a podcast? And fast forward, I started in March of 2021 as the full-time podcast host. So I know that's a rare role to be full-time just doing the podcast, but you'll see why throughout my presentation that that's part of why we've seen this growth and this strategy. So again, I'm going to highlight a little bit about social media, video, strategy. We are at 112 episodes and counting. We just hit our 100th episode in January. Who listens? Audience is mostly alumni, also faculty and staff. Like John said, students, parents of students, they can get that taste of Purdue. If their child is thinking about coming to Purdue and they see a clip on, Facebook from our podcast, and that drives them to listen to the episode, that's something really exciting that to lead more and more, students who want to apply to Purdue and come to Purdue. What we measure listens, whether it's Apple, Spotify, those smaller podcast apps. We, track who's visiting our Purdue website. We have a specific podcast website on our Purdue website, and that embedded player URL from our host platform is on all of our podcast pages. So people can listen through that, and we can track those as well. Our views, our YouTube channel has given us a lot of data that we didn't previously have. That's a whole nother webinar about podcast data and analytics. But, we're tracking how many people are viewing, how many people are subscribed to our YouTube channel, what the percentage is that they're watching. If it's a 35-minute video interview, are they watching 8 minutes through? Are they watching 16 minutes through? So YouTube has been a really great source for us as far as data. Okay, storytelling. Chris, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So I know I saw a lot of you are thinking about starting a podcast. And it's a lot of consistency and working ahead. So our show is released every other Thursday. We have never missed a deadline. We have never taken a week off. It's a lot of consistency, no pushing deadlines. And your audience is expecting these episodes to drop, especially as you grow. And so even with the holidays and everything, we continue to drop episodes. And I'll get to, repurposing content can be another strategy as well. I'll get to that later. But any of you who have a podcast out there, there are so many pieces and parts, graphics, artwork, video components for us. The writing, a lot of my job is writing. It's the research and prep that goes into forming our prep guides for our guests, my episode script, show notes, social media posts, how can we hook them in from a social media post, and then everything in between. So we have an incredible team that works together on all of these assets. It's definitely not just me, but I would say besides being a host, my main role is really to feature like really great writing that I put into the podcast. Another strategy we've been working towards, and in 2024 especially, is aligning episodes with timing. John mentioned, he capitalized off the timing of having that actor from Ted Lasso as the season was wrapping up. And so a couple examples of this for us this year, our women's basketball team, our men's basketball team is fantastic too, but our women's basketball team won the NCAA tournament 25 years ago. So we had a couple members from that team on as a virtual interview because they're scattered all over to celebrate that 25th anniversary and for them to reflect back. And we released it in March. So we had March Madness, we had basketball, we had all these specific keywords that people were already looking for. And that episode ended up being the one that took us to #1 on Apple Podcasts education top charts. Another example, you can see me with that golfer there. He is a PGA Tour golfer, Adam Schenk. He's incredible. We did an interview with him in the fall. We waited to release it until right before the Masters. He was playing in his first Masters. And again, the SEO and the keywords, Masters, PGA Tour, tagging all of those on social media, those handles. And he ended up placing 11th. So pretty incredible for someone, his first Masters. I watched it. We also were able to, again, kind of capitalize off that and say, you know, Boilermaker Adam Schenk placed 11th in the Masters. Did you watch it? And that did really well on social media too. The Indianapolis 500, if anyone's an IndyCar fan, we are tied very closely in with the Indy 500 and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Our band plays at the Indy 500 every year. A lot of our engineers work on IndyCar entries. They're part of the IndyCar circuit. So we highlight different episodes that have to do with the Indy 500, and we release that right before that race on that Thursday. And again, that episode this year already skyrocketed to our top episode after like a month of being out. So we know that our audience is loving that content. Finally, if anyone here watches Jeopardy, I don't know if you do or not, but we have a professor and archivist who recently became a Jeopardy super champion. She won 15 games in a row. So we did a quick virtual interview with her, and that'll be going out in a couple weeks here. But again, everyone was talking about it. The Boilermaker community was buzzing about it. Why not have her on the podcast, right? So if any of you are thinking, and I think a question was asked in here, how do you find the guests? What types of stories do you want to tell on the show? Again, I think with your college or university, you need to lean on a variety of topics. We have a world-class engineering school, but we can't have all of our episodes featuring STEM and engineering and all of that incredible stuff that's happening at Purdue. We also want to have more lighthearted content. Our College of Liberal Arts is incredible. We have, you know, actors who are on Netflix, who are in the movie Dune, things like that. So how can we mix it up and tell that story that Purdue features an incredible education from STEM to liberal arts and to our athletics? People love our athletics episodes as well because of our great athletics teams, right? Another thing that we use the podcast for is to share more about university initiatives. What's important to your president, to your university? You can use the podcast to talk about that and have guests on who can share those stories as well. And then as far as a mini series approach, this might be down the road for some of you, but we actually have 2 special series under the This is Purdue umbrella. You'll see that bottom picture, that's our Purdue research series. So if you maybe had extra special content, you had some VIP guests, you could set aside a specific series and kind of theme that content. Maybe it's you're interviewing every dean at your school. Maybe it's a behind the scenes with the baseball coach, the basketball coach, the volleyball coach. And you can kind of brand that in a different way so that your audience knows it's different from normal episodes. So we started our research series in 2023. Purdue research is literally changing the world. And what are our researchers doing to provide practical solutions to the world's toughest challenges? So we dig into that really bite-sized, try to stay around 30 minutes because some of the topics are quite complex. So semiconductor research and education. That professor that you see there in that graphic, he's working on NASA's James Webb Space Telescope. What is he doing in space research that's impacting the world? World hunger, food security, sustainability. We interviewed food science professors on what Purdue is doing to help solve world hunger. And then we have our 2024 series coming out very soon, and it actually ties into the Olympics because it's all about sports engineering. So again, aligning that timing with big events. The second mini series that we have is called Boilermaker Bites. I actually thought of this idea from another podcast that I listened to. And I was thinking Purdue's campus has so many iconic restaurants, and part of your experience as a college student is eating at these restaurants, right? So I knew our alumni would feel that nostalgia. In the episodes, I kind of described the restaurant. I described the setting we're in. We talk about the food. You know, we literally order, and the waiter or waitress is in the episode with us, kind of interacting with us. And then we eat the meal, and we've really found that guests open up and share more. It's kind of like you're chatting with a friend over dinner, kind of like Hot Ones, if anyone's a fan of that. People are more authentic, and we're able to have those candid conversations. All right, and that's a picture of that, those two men at the restaurant. So next up, marketing and distribution. If we can go.
And a quick note here, because I saw a question earlier about Amanda Rose, how to find story leads. And if you're a smaller institution, you don't have famous alum like the Ted Lasso actor, you have the famous folks at your institutions, like those professors, right, that are doing world-changing research. So look within first, get those episodes scheduled, and then people will come to you if you build that audience.
And like John mentioned too, you would be surprised at how many people, once you're up and going, will, comment on Facebook, hey, this person would be a great guest. And you'll start having leads come to you. The ultimate compliment is when you have professors or famous alum who are trying to come on your show and you're trying to open up a spot for them. So I promise, it'll come as the show grows. So our video strategy, yes, we do virtual interviews like John and Cuse Conversations, but a lot of our interviews now are in person. I started during the pandemic, but as things evolved, we started toying around with these big in-person shoots on campus that reflect the environment that the guest, is sharing about. So Coach Matt Painter, we did that right in Mackey Arena, and people want to watch that on YouTube, right? You're like, oh, I remember going to a game. Oh, they're doing so well this season. So having that in-person video content, again, I have a wonderful video team, but that's something that we've really been growing and experimenting with throughout the past 3.5 years. One of the first things I did when I was hired is I put our audio episodes on Purdue's YouTube channel. So listeners could access it that way if that's how they preferred consuming the podcast. And you already have the audio file that you're putting on Apple and Spotify. So why not do that little bit of an extra lift and add it to YouTube? Now, one of the top places people are listening to podcasts is YouTube. And that's been something happening throughout the past 2 or 3 years as well. There's a specific podcast tab on YouTube. And so finally, we branched off from our main Purdue YouTube channel, which I was a little bit hesitant about, I can't lie, but we formed our own podcast channel, and that has been an incredible strategic move for us. In the first 6 months, we had 1.1 million views. A year and a half in now, we have 3.5 million views. We have 2,200 subscribers. We can put any type of video from these 30 to 45-minute videos on our YouTube page and not kind of oversaturate the main Purdue channel with just podcast stuff. So that's been a great strategy for us. Part of that is that short form content. And so we're taking the short form and we're trying to get them to the full episode, right? So we do these 60-second trailers, kind of the best highlights of the episode, what's going to make people listen. Those go on all of our social media channels the day the episode is released. And then also on our YouTube page, we have 2 to 3 minute clips, highlighting, if you can't fit it all in 60 seconds, highlighting a good chunk of content from the episode. YouTube ads, if you have some podcast budget, you can create unique and fun ads to run as a promotion before the episode goes out. I'll show you an example of this in a few minutes, but the CTA would be to subscribe to the YouTube channel so they don't miss the episode and the other video content. And again, you don't even have to put spend behind it. You could just create a video that's promoting your next episode. So that's another option as well, but that's been successful for our team. So along with trailers and clips on YouTube, we have really gotten into the YouTube Shorts space. And we've seen so much organic growth in that area. So we had a former NFL and Purdue quarterback, Curtis Painter. We interviewed him and we were like, let's just have him throwing the football. Like, let's talk about tips to throw a spiral. And so now if you Google it, how to throw a spiral, our podcast YouTube short comes up on the main page. So again, leaning on that like SEO, the keywords, And we have fun with it too. With that audience on YouTube Shorts, you can use hashtags, you can use emojis. We use a lot of emojis in the titles. And then again, with the PGA Tour golfer Adam Schenk, when you Google Adam Schenk, our podcast content comes up because of our thoughtful SEO and keyword research that we did for that episode. The other thing, you can repurpose these shorts into Instagram Reels or TikToks if that's what your school has. But you can repurpose all of this content so that you're working smarter and not harder. Podcast promotion kits, John talked a little bit about this too, but we send the guest everything the morning that the episode goes live. So the Apple link, the Spotify link, the link to our website, here's a direct link to our LinkedIn post. And all you have to do is hit that reshare, right? So the trailer video is there, the guest is tagged, the copy is there, and they can simply just reshare it. Those podcast promotion kits also include social media copy, our branded graphics. You can see that bottom one. We have a very specific look and feel to our graphics that our audience knows now. And so when they're scrolling on Instagram or Facebook, et cetera, they know, oh, wow, this is Purdue dropped another episode. We're very consistent in that branding. Campus partners, John talked about this too. Of course, this is such an easy move, work with people that, are on your campus. You can send them the marketing content packages. It's everything they need to download the graphics, the exact social copy. They can just copy and paste it and work that into their social content calendar. They can reshare it if you tag the school on social media yourself. So again, if the guest is from our College of Engineering and is an alumni of that, we're sharing it with the College of Engineering communications department. Distribution plans. This is something that's fairly new for us. We've been doing it about a year, but I basically take notes of anyone that the guest mentions. So maybe it's another alum, maybe it's a dean that really helped them, maybe it's a professor at Purdue that they just really admired, and we send it to all those people. Are they part of any organizations? Are they on any boards? Their company's PR and communications team. It might seem like a long shot, but once you start sending that out and people start sharing it, especially if the guest is a little humble or maybe doesn't have time to share, usually if you send it to their company's PR or communications team, they will take that and share it with their audience, which is just, obviously you're distributing it to a larger audience overall. Repurposing content. So end of the year, we always do our top, 4 or 5 episodes. So we're reflecting on the year, we're repurposing that content and highlighting that again. Guest birthdays, Coach Painter's birthday is coming up. So we can reshare on social media our podcast interview with him. News headlines, if anything's happening in the news, or maybe there's a big event coming up, we could reshare our Indy 500 episode or our PGA Tour episode. And then, of course, podcast celebrations, our 100th episode, for example, we repurposed content for that and also brought our listeners in, which I'll talk a little bit about in the next slide.
That's really good insights, Kate. Rick asked real quick, post-interview editing. I know that John gave an answer there. It's not a lot of editing on his part. How about you? You got a big team behind that?
Yes, I do. So Rick, I write out a very detailed script of when I want the music, what quotes I want. I record like an intro and an outro as well. So I'm creating this really concise script, but I'm not doing the actual editing. I do know how to edit, but it is in much better hands that with our audio engineer, that I don't do that. So that's definitely a big piece of it too, though, is the editing and the post-production. But again, if you're doing it on Zoom or something, you can download that combined file and, really have a complete episode there. So there's easy ways to work around that too. So building a community, there's a lot that we do around campus, around the Boilermaker community, attending campus events. I present at large alumni events or in classrooms to the students and just talk through the podcast. I've hosted basketball games and kind of done plugs for the podcast. I'm Kate Young. I'm the host of This is Purdue. For those in the audience that might not, know that we have a podcast. Sponsored golf tournaments. This seems a little bit random, but we've sponsored several golf tournaments and we have that branded signage. We gave away Purdue golf divot tools. We set up like a booth on a certain hole and talked to people about the podcast who, the golfers as they came through. This also led to me emceeing a golf tournament with Coach Painter as a special guest. And so I did an onstage interview with him during the luncheon portion of this golf outing. And then we repurposed that and put that on our YouTube channel. So if you're a host or if, you're a big part of the show, you yourself can go out in the community and do things that help grow the show. And then you can also repurpose that. So another thing, we had the total solar eclipse in Indianapolis, once in a lifetime event. We had 5 astronauts, some of them NASA, some of them not, but we had these incredible astronaut panelists and we did our first live event for the podcast. So we repurposed it into a podcast episode. We also live streamed it from YouTube and it has more than 4,000 organic views. It still lives on there and people were able to access it if they couldn't come to the event in Indy. But that was a really cool podcast focused event that we did. And then giveaways, podcast t-shirts, etc. But I want to get to my video examples really quickly. So
Sure.
this one is a YouTube ad. This is a really popular alum who sings at a local bar. He's been doing it for 30 years. And I say it in this video, anyone who went to Purdue knows who this is. So.
Oh, hey, Kate.
Hey, if you're a Boilermaker, you probably recognize this guy.
And I'm going to be featured on the official Purdue podcast, This is Purdue.
So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss this episode with Bruce.
Boiler up!
So we did a lot of pre-promotion for that episode. We did posters around campus. That was one that both students and alum were really interested in. This is an example of jumping on a trend. So what's trending on TikTok? What's trending on Instagram Reels? If you can tie it in, try it. This is me trying to tie that in to a trend.
I'm a podcast host. Of course I wear This is Purdue merch. I'm a podcast host. Of course I have to wear these goofy headphones. I'm a podcast host.
I already forgot it.
I'm a podcast host. Of course I'm always dreaming of hitting #1 on Apple Podcasts. I'm a podcast host. Of course I'm going to ask you for your whole life story even though I've known you for 5 minutes. I'm a podcast host. Of course my mom listens to my episodes. I'm a podcast host. Of course I have to end every episode with listen wherever you get your podcasts.
That was part of our 100th episode celebration. My friend, who is our social media manager, shot that just outside in my neighborhood. So that we kind of pulled that out of nowhere and it ended up being a hit. So, okay, I'll just do this last one. I want to make sure that we have time for questions, but this is that professor who works on NASA's James Webb Space Telescope. He's been on national TV. He's incredible. If you can find a star like him in your university, they will do incredible things for your show. Okay.
Did you know that if you take 1 teaspoon of neutron star material made in a supernova explosion, it would weigh the same as the entire human population? Did you know that if you took all the gold that's on the James Webb Space Telescope mirror, melted it down, it'd be about the size of a golf ball? Cool. Did you know that some stars explode as supernovae?
But not the sun.
Oh, that's right.
Again, finding cool, fun guests who are willing to do things really elevate your show. Okay, I do want to
do this one, Kate. We got some time. Let's go do this one
All
too.
right. This is really short. This is an example of a short. So keep that in mind. Talk us through, that trip to the Final Four and ultimately, winning the whole thing. Like, how does it feel now, 25 years later, but also reflecting back, can you remember like the nerves, the excitement?
Well, you want the real story?
Yes. Yes, we do. And so that's just simple. The title is do you want the real story, right? And people are like, well, what's the real story? What the heck? I remember when they won 25 years ago. So I want to wrap up. I know, the strategy doesn't happen overnight. The growth doesn't happen overnight. This has been 3.5 years of testing, experimenting. We've changed things. So don't be afraid to start small and grow and scale over time. So that's kind of my last pitch. Don't be discouraged if your listen numbers aren't super high to begin with. It will grow if you put the time and energy into it. So thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you both so much. Let's have a couple of questions. This will be recorded, so if somebody has to drop off, that's fine. I'll send the link out soon with the recording so you can go back. Let's answer a couple of questions here. Victoria asked, how much research do you do on the people you're interviewing?
Well, I think Kate's short example where it's like, I'm going to ask your whole life story, even though I've only known you for 5 minutes, is a pretty apt summary. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish with the episodes, but we try, if it's someone that you know very well, I try to go for things that haven't been talked about in their journey. Yes, you want to get the role the university has played in their development, but it's fun to go beneath the surface and maybe find stories that they haven't talked about publicly. So I mean, if it's a student, I love to go out there and find out, like, I don't know much about the students, to be honest, before they come on. So a lot of it is like coming up with like where their heads are at, their research, what they're focusing on, how they want to make a difference once they graduate. My interview prep could take anywhere from an hour to a couple of hours. If it's somebody like Bob Costas, who I was like, boy, I got to bring my A game for the Hall of Famer. I can't come up with these, sheepish questions. You want to come out there and make the alum proud of the chance to be on the podcast. But it all depends on what your goals are for that episode. You can never be too prepared, but you also don't want it to, again, fall back into I'm reading question 1, you answer question 1. I'm reading question 2. Like if a guest says something that piques your interest, break away, follow up. You can ask short follow-up questions. It never hurts to have that curiosity. That to me is the biggest advice I can give people. Don't be afraid to start an episode. There's no such thing as failure. You might only get a couple of downloads at first, but you're going to grow your audience. So go out there, try, and employ that curiosity. That'll carry you really far.
Yeah, absolutely. I think prep is really important. But again, we actually send our questions to our guests ahead of time. And sometimes that approach might not be the best idea. So think through that with your team. Sometimes people memorize the questions and it's a bit too canned. But for the most part, we don't want to surprise anyone with any crazy questions. But another fun thing is with our research series, for example, yes, this professor is brilliant and he does all this research on semiconductors, but he's also really into motorcycles. So at the end of the interview, we were asking him about his motorcycle collection. And that was a really good, like, personal human moment. And I remember people saying to me, oh, that was such a cool part too at the end when he talked about how he's going on a motorcycle road trip with his friend. So try to pull out those strategic, thoughtful things that have to do with, the university, but also you can go deeper on their personal level, what, their family, what they like to do outside of work. And that's always pretty good content too.
That's awesome. Yes, Sarah Holland, real quick, she asked about recording on Zoom. What is the technical process there in setting it up? I would suggest or assume you put it on the cloud, record on the cloud, so you have the recording, the transcript, all that good stuff.
Yeah, we absolutely record to the cloud. A lot of times we'll do a pre-meeting, a pre-screening where we'll go back and say, okay, do you have a microphone? And I want to say too, on the microphone piece, you can buy a USB microphone for $40. I'm going to put a link in the chat here of this one that Amazon has that is absolutely fantastic for a starter mic. You don't have to break the budget buying microphone gear. That looks like a really funky wonky link, but I promise you it's legit. It's an Amazon Prime Day sale. I'm not getting paid a single penny for Prime, but that's a mic you want to promote out there. And with Zoom, as long as the person has the right technology, which again is a simple microphone to capture their audio, have their earbuds, the iPods in their ears so they can hear you, do a little test beforehand, make sure their audio sounds good. You hit record to the cloud, and once it's done, yeah, you download it to your computer. And I use my Audacity software. I am old school. I grew up editing clips for Newhouse at Syracuse using Audacity. It's free. It's easy to use with word-based shortcuts. But of course, you can also use Adobe Audition to do your editing. There's all sorts of, if you're in video, Premiere works really well. But Zoom is very easy to use and user-friendly.
That's awesome. Yeah, I actually have that mic that you just shared. Great quality, much better than the one in the laptop. So highly recommend spending a couple bucks on it. But yeah, I don't see any other questions. So please, please, please connect with Kate, connect with John, check out their shows. You can just scan a QR code to get to those, follow them. I'm sure if you have any additional questions, you can just message them on LinkedIn. They'll be happy to share their insights with you. Go back to the episode or this webinar again if you have any other additional questions, or you can also reach out to me. I work for Hannon Hill. Check out Hannon Hill if you have any websites need for your CMS or personalization. We have a YouTube channel where we put all of our webinars on it. Like I said, we have a webinar series this year, so you can go back to other webinars. And if you don't want to miss another webinar, just sign up for our newsletter, and I always will promote that newsletter there. So Kate, John, what an honor to have you on this webinar series. So thank you both so very much for being a part of it.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and sharing this information, and happy to answer any questions. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
Very
yeah,
good.
We all started somewhere. We all rely on each other's advice. And Kate mentioned podcast movement. The best part about that were the 10 of us in higher ed institutional roles who formed our own networking sessions, and then we've kept in touch to varying degrees. So please reach out, communicate, let us help you, because we've all been there.
Perfect, guys. Well, everybody, thank you so much. We got another webinar coming up in the middle of August on short form videos and how to use it for student retention. So please join us again. Until then, watch out for the link. We'll see you next time.